Russia and the West. What divides us? What unites us? In the interview, Russian writer Viktor Erofeyev.
Victor, you've been a harsh critic of Russia's role in the Ukraine crisis. President Putin met this week with Western leaders in France for the first time since the escalation of the crisis. He also met with US President Barack Obama. What's your assessment? Is it a step towards reconciliation?
He met with Obama and Poroshenko, but that is not a conciliatory gesture. There's a Russian saying that seeing one swallow doesn't mean it's summer. But there is movement, and I'm pleased at that. We observed the revolution that unfolded on the Maidan, but events in Donetsk were altogether different. So much bloodshed. The violence must stop, first and foremost. And if politicians work to stop the bloodshed, then I'd see that as success, at least a step forward.
Your newest science fiction novel, Akumu D, is almost like a prophecy of recent events in Crimea and eastern Ukraine. It's as if you predicted everything.
It's horrifying. So much so that I sometimes think I should stop writing books. I just returned from Poland, where a play has been produced based on my book. People there believe I'm a prophet. But I don't want to play that part. Still, I do feel some kind of supernatural force. In 1984, I wrote a story called The Pocket Apocalypse. It's been published in Russian and German. It prophesied the Perestroika movement, the conflict in Ukraine, and the Crimea problem.
What real value does Russia place on Ukraine? Why did Ukraine, of all countries, spark this conflict?
That's a vast topic. Let's simplify it. It is a conflict of values. Ukraine as a whole has been more and more influenced by the West. Western Ukraine has always been allied with Poland, Austria, and Hungary. So there is a colossal Western influence. But over the past few years, that influence essentially stopped in Kiev. Eastern Ukraine is drawn more to Russian values, which are very different than in the West. Western leaders refuse to recognize this cultural split. Eastern Ukraine and Russia believe citizens should serve the state with all their being. The individual is essentially enslaved by the state. Western values see the state as an instrument of the people. That's the crux of the matter.
Has the West been too naive in its dealings with Russia? As the Cold War came to a close, were expectations too high that Eastern and Western Europe would merge?
Yes, there is a lot of naivete, but also a basic lack of knowledge. The West simply doesn't have a solid working knowledge of Russia. As Perestroika began, it raised unrealistic expectations for Russia's future. And Western governments initially placed a lot of trust in Putin. That's especially true of Germany. They based that trust on the fact that he spoke German and had an affinity for German culture. But the reality was very different. On the day that Putin took power, it became clear that Crimea's future hung in the balance. He simply waited for the best time to strike and seize Crimea. That's clear. A lot of people say that shouldn't happen in the 21st century. But who says Russia has reached the 21st century? Today, Russia still lives in the 17th, 18th, and 19th, perhaps the 20th century as well. So many Soviet communist structures are still in place, and there is little 21st century influence. The archaic primitive values are much the same as in an African village. They're entrenched, and the citizens are not ashamed of that.
Most Russians do support the Kremlin's policies. Opinion polls show around 80% support. You've characterized the Russian people as strange. Why?
Because the people have no conceptions of the problems they're creating. That's true of the government as well. They didn't annex some uninhabited island in the middle of the ocean. They seized a major piece of territory, right in the middle of Europe. And for the moment, they're celebrating. But it comes at the expense of an enormous amount of trust. In the long run, the cost of Crimea will be very high.
How do you explain Putin's behavior in this conflict and on the world stage as a whole? What is his driving ambition?
You should put that question directly to President Putin. But since that's not possible, let's put ourselves in his shoes. He broadly rejects Western values. Despite that, the West put an immense amount of trust in him, especially Germany. His only reason for improving relations with the West was to fulfill Russian interests, the need for technology and modernization. But he will always defend the basic Russian understanding of life, death, and religion, as has been done for centuries. And now Putin is offended. He's easily offended. He was outraged when the West supported the Russian opposition movement. At first, everyone gave him hugs. Merkel kissed him and they talked. But then Germany voiced support for the protesters. Putin probably wished he could ship them all off to detention camps or prison. So he decided to turn his back on the West and began building his own empire. He sought closer ties with China. The West has failed to understand that he truly feels that he's been betrayed. He thought he'd won friends and allies. And then they turned on him and supported a protest movement that was trying to topple him from power. So he turned his back on the West and sought new allies, all the while dreaming of a Russian empire. And then along comes Ukraine and says, "We want nothing to do with your empire."
Putin does have Western supporters, especially right and left-wing opponents of globalization. Are we at a turning point? Will Putin become the leader of an international anti-democratic movement?
No, Putin would never accept a ragtag coalition of right and left-wing groups. But Moscow has officially expressed its congratulations for French nationalist Marine Le Pen. She's seen as an ally of Russia's emerging nationalist ideology. Europe is weak at the moment, and that's why it was so easy for Putin to strike a major blow. Europe simply hasn't come up with a unified response to the annexation of Crimea. It's easy to criticize Russia. It has no clear political agenda, and the nation operates outside the rule of law. Plus, Putin is a former KGB officer. But the West refuses to recognize its own weaknesses. Russia's nationalistic ideology has exposed them. So they're looking at alliances with European nationalists. The two sides have extended hands of friendship.
What can the West do to integrate Russia?
The West must first gain a better understanding of Russia. The things I'm saying here may make Western leaders scratch their heads. They view Russia as a filthy back room in the European villa. They think they can go in with a vacuum cleaner and mop everything up, and everything will be fine. In fact, Russia is another house altogether. It's next door, but it stands alone. That's the key failure of understanding. The West urgently needs to gain a new understanding of Russia, and then find the right method to force Russia to uphold its international obligations. You can't kick Russia or criticize it or spit on it. That makes it even stronger, more violent and aggressive, and more isolated. Russia survived in isolation for almost a century. Sanctions don't frighten Russia. They're a source of pride. They invigorate the Russian soul.
Victor, thank you for your time.